Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is Alistair Ballantyne, and welcome to episode 3 of The Big Soup. This episode's theme is plastic or gold. And plastic or gold is all about the kind of person you want to be, the kind of life you want to lead, the kind of values that you have, the kind of things that you desire in others, and ultimately is a meditation on how a plastic society is taking a big plastic shit in all of our heads, minds, and hearts. Our world is struggling because of a spiritual deficit. Spirituality is the glue that holds so many things in life together, and it is what connects us all to one another as well. And even just that sense of spiritual awareness, the texture of energy between people and the connections that we all have, doesn't have to be some big woo-woo thing. It's just an awareness. Something that I find troubling is this culture that has exploded online of this massive, rampant, throbbing individualism. And yes, I'm choosing my words intentionally here because there is this sense that supposedly if the rugged individual can make it in this world, and then that is the way that we're supposed to live, rather than recognizing that, humans have survived this long because of community and connection and working together. These values that try to separate us from each other only support a very regressive social and political agenda. Many people who are holding on to these values ultimately do so because society has failed them in some way or another. They have been left behind, they have been frozen out, there has been various different things that have eroded away the fabric of support for them, but also structures of meaning and avenues of connection. We have to some degree take a compassionate view of how some people will end up in this situation, whereas we can take a discompassionate view of those who will subscribe to these kind of ideologies and push them on others because it benefits them and only serves to advance their personal cause. Now, I find it interesting as someone who walks a spiritual path because I don't believe in living a life where we completely deny ourselves of the physical material things. But what's important is the foundation that we build that on, the foundation of heart and the foundation of soul and the foundation of recognition that not all things that are of value in this life and in this world will have monetary value. For example, two of my most treasured possessions are a rock and a lump of wood. I'm not joking here. Now, I don't have them with me to show on the video because those of you watching on the video will see that I'm recording from a different location today as I'm currently house sitting for one of my friends. So this lump of wood is cut from an oak tree that was around the corner from where I used to live. I didn't cut it myself. There was someone doing some work on the tree in the park, and this lump of wood had been set to the side from the tree. So I just kind of thought, well, why not? Like, this is pretty cool. It's not harming anything, and I like it. Sometimes you just want to have things because you like them. And, I'd been going to this tree for a long time. I used to sit and, contemplate under it. So this is my contemplation tree. And I thought, wow, it'd be nice to have a piece of the contemplation tree to carry on this journey with me because I was leaving the area not so long afterwards. And also now it turns out they've put a big fence up around the tree and you can't get anywhere near it. So a nice piece of foresight from myself there and recognizing that, well, maybe one day you won't actually be able to have contact with this. So there we go from that. I took possession of this, I think, in 2021. So I've had that for 4 years. Now, this rock, shall we say, or mineral is it's what I lovingly refer to as the Led Zeppelin quartz. Now, when I was at guitar college, after we'd finished the first year, first of 4, one of my friends lived in North Wales, and he offered for me to go and spend some time with him, visit over the summer. And I was like, yeah, for sure, man. And while I was there, we took a trip to this small town called Machynlleth. And just outside Machynlleth is Bronwyar Cottage, where very famously Jimmy Page and Robert Plant went to write quite a lot of Led Zeppelin 3 and some of Led Zeppelin 4. Now, there were tons of these quartz all around the place, and I thought no one's going to miss one of these because there's hundreds of them everywhere. These big things like about the size of a fist, maybe a little bit bigger. And I just picked this one piece that for some reason seems to sit really nicely in your hand, however you hold it. And I have had this quartz with me for the past 20 years. It's come through all of these different house moves with me. It's come all around the country through all these different eras of my life, and it remains a treasured possession. And with these two things, they're not exactly things that, money can buy. They're not things that will necessarily mean anything to anyone else. But to me, they're very valuable objects because I find that when I'm drawn to them or drawn to sit with them, it's in these moments where I need to kind of organize my mind or drop in or have some kind of perspective. And I find it helpful to connect with them. And what I find interesting is, the market for these kind of materials, for stuff that we would use to meditate with, various different props, singing bowls, crystals, beads, whatever, all this kind of stuff, says the man clearly wearing a lot of beads. It's massive, but still, we can find this magic for ourselves in the mundane things that have a special resonance to us personally. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they are without value. Something that's troubling to me with human connection now is human connection seems to have a price of admission. Everyone is claiming that they have a degree of value and a degree of energy that only certain people can access, or you've got to be like this if you want to come into my energy. Now, I understand that having strong boundaries is important, having values is important, and having the ability to recognize if someone matches your vibration or your energy or your perspective to come closer to you is an important thing. But we've been encouraged to view these in such a way that is like treating ourselves like products, treating ourselves like luxury brands. And this is one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because so many of the podcasts out there are taking a shit in people's minds, encouraging us to view ourselves as these inhuman products and things that, you've got to pay a toll to access, or you've got to pay a fee to get involved with. It's so materialistic and vacuous. Now, again, like I said, I'm not someone who believes that, if you're going to have a spiritual life, you've got to have, no material possessions or no worldly riches, or, deny the physical experience. This is a horse crap. The thing here is we have to recognize is that those things don't define the experience. They don't make us. They aren't what brings value to us. They augment, they supplement, they elevate, but if we're not building them on a foundation of heart, not building them on a foundation of soul, then they are ultimately meaningless. They become hollow, they become vacuous. When we recognize these things as symptoms of a plastic society where consumption is a religion, and we pray to the gods of finance and business and material success, we are kind of screwed in a little way. But, it's never too late to get some perspective and have a shift and change how you're engaging with things. But when these become like the yardstick that you measure everything with, when they become the things that everything else are weighed against, you have a serious problem. As I say this, I'm reminded of the story of what happens to the soul after death in Egyptian mythology. Again, I'm still reluctant to call these things mythology because that's a way of invalidating belief systems through colonization, but then people get a bit spicy when I call the Bible Abrahamic myth. So what you going to do? Can't have it both ways. Anyway, I digress because I'm feeling a little spicy myself today. When someone dies, their heart is weighed in the scales against the feather of truth. And if their heart is lighter than the feather of truth, they pass through to go into I believe it's the field of reeds, where essentially it's the afterlife, the eternal plane. And if it isn't, if it's heavier, their soul is then devoured, and it goes to oblivion, this kind of thing. Again, we can look at this as, one of the analogues with the myth of heaven and hell and all of this kind of stuff. But I find it interesting that for me, I've always tried to be a light-hearted person because once upon a time, I was very much the opposite. I spent most of my 20s in and out of depression and struggling with various different things because I found it difficult to gain a foothold in the plastic society. I found that every time I tried to kind of bow down and roll over to the demands that this society puts upon us, things would go wrong. And always being someone who was in pursuit of a higher truth, to me, I started to find that things would line up and come together when I would have that at front and center of my actions and decision-making process, and everything else would kind of come as it may. Now, what I find interesting here is we live in a very unequal system. We live in a system that prizes survival of the fittest, these very outdated ideas from Victorian times that people seem to be intent on dragging us back to in many ways. But again, I don't think survival of the fittest is the way that we need to be going. I don't think that's how we should be styling ourselves and how we should be moving forward as we seek to build a future for all that is more equitable and allows everyone that same chance to get ahead. Because again, if we have become a society that demonizes people at the bottom, that demonizes people that have not had the same opportunities, that demonizes people of different colored skin, sexual identity, political belief, gender, all of these different things, we are a plastic society. And the world is getting hotter. Plastic melts in the heat, gold purifies in the heat. And we have to recognize that this idea of the plastic society permeates all systems, just like how most of us are probably pretty full of microplastics right now because of the plastic society that doesn't give a shit about the world and its environment and each other. And no. Everyone is there to be consumed, given and sacrificed to the plastic gods, all of these kind of things. And then through this unequal system and through this unequal landscape, we have people out there advocating that the only way to get ahead is to become more of the oppressive system, to internalize these ideas and values that will essentially allow you to step on the necks of others to get to where you want to be. I don't necessarily think that this is a positive thing to be doing or the right way to go, because personally, I've always found a better sense of movement, motion in life when I have worked in harmony with the energy flowing through things. I've worked in harmony with the people around us. I've stopped shying away from leadership. I've stopped shying away from that recognition that to do what I want to do, I have to kind of be the tip of the spear in many things and also be that person that lights the way for others. That's fine. But the thing that is important to me is to encourage that sense of agency and autonomy. So when it comes to application of self in the world, you're making conscious decisions from who you actually are, not what people are trying to pour into your mind as to what you're supposed to be. So within these unequal systems, we can still find a way, we can still move forward, but without having to become the system itself. And we'll notice that at the moment, suddenly if you come out as saying, oh, I have compassion for people, I have empathy for others, or I don't think everyone should struggle, or I think we should have our basic needs met, or maybe we should fund healthcare, infrastructure, education, transport, utilities through our tax collecting systems rather than them going purely to the engines of death and destruction. You're labeled as some kind of crazy person, And what we need to recognize is that anything to the side of this very hyper individualistic, regressive and selfish structure of belief and value is going to be labeled as extreme by an extreme perspective. And something that we have to also be careful not to fall into the trap of now is this idea of a left wing and a right wing when it comes to our political systems. Because left wing and right wing, when you go far enough in either direction, it's a horseshoe. And there is little that separates the extreme of either. What we need to recognize is what ideas are constructive and progressive and what ideas are obstructive and regressive. And it's the obstructive and regressive ideas that are the bedrock of the plastic society. Now, the reason that I'm framing it like this is I'm trying to put out there ideas that no matter where you might naturally find yourself on these spectrums, if you feel that these ideas are speaking to you, like, well, I might not agree with everything he's saying, but do you know what? Like, there are some points here. You might just not have to identify with those systems anymore. I think we can start pulling ourselves out of this binary, because ultimately these binaries get portrayed as good versus evil, which is the same as, false religion and in very regressive interpretations of the supposed word of God, which of course is always written by humankind. But again, we see that they push this narrative, and with that, this is the bedrock of the plastic society. So if we're going to free ourselves from the plastic society, we need to look at the mechanisms, we need to look at the structures, we need to look at how people embody this and how they choose to move with that. And then if we can see through that, we can start to see that actually maybe a lot of people are trying to push for the same thing, but they're pushing through it from different lenses. And if we can start to speak to the commonality between things and between people and between ideas, we might actually start to get somewhere. Because I tell you what, it seems to me like more and more people are wanting to have a sense of a society where everyone's basic needs are met, wanting to have a society where we're not going all in on death and destruction and repression and all of these regressive ideas, and the idea that some parts of the world are inherently good and some parts are inherently evil, or the idea that some beliefs are inherently righteous and some are inherently evil. If anything needs to have an opposition, if anything needs to have, this is the bad, this is the evil, so we are the good, we are the righteous, we are the holy, is a plastic belief. It's fake. It is created by human hand for the express purpose of control, oppression, status, and power. These pyramid structures that, again, one of these themes that we'll be returning to throughout the journey through the Big Soup is these pyramid structures that we do not need because they keep us repressed, they keep us small, they keep us under the boot. Yet we have come to aspire to build our own pyramids, these pyramids of plastic. We pay tribute and blood sacrifice to the plastic gods on the altar of bullshit. All of these kind of things, we need to free ourselves from them. We need to recognize where they're coming from, why they have been put in place over time. And the pathway towards the future is not to become these hyper individualized versions of that on a personal level, because that is not even a society, that is not even a civilization, and that is not a world that will survive for very long. Now, I find it interesting that supposedly our systems of value and systems of virtue are tied to these regressive ideas that supposedly, if you're not a religious person, you don't have a morality framework. There isn't a structure there to which to be measured as good. I think that this is complete crap, because ultimately you can have that sense of being a good person with the actions that you take in how you choose to treat others. How we see others that can do nothing for us is a very, very easy way to tell if the person is a good person or not. If people only see value in others that can advance their cause or can do something for them in some way or another, then they are walking the embodied path of the plastic society and its bullshit. Hate to break it to you, but that's the way it is. And in all honesty, you probably worked that out yourself as well. Because everyone has got something to offer. Everyone has got something to put on the table. And what we need to recognize there is not everything that is of value is of monetary value. There is a quote from Oscar Wilde that says, "Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing," which I find personally quite interesting, because, again, this is another Victorian era idea that is relevant to the world as we are today. We haven't really advanced that far. We may have more technology, but we are still those same primitive creatures on the precipice of a consciousness awakening. but being dragged back by those who have no imagination, passion, or vision, because everything that they hold dear is plastic, and everything that they aspire to be is plastic. And you point this out to them, they will lose their minds, because they've internalized that system and structure so much that any critique of the system is taken as a personal attack on the self. Now, I've had a lot of experience in online business and some of the bizarre characters that world seems to bring into being. Some of them are the most plastic people I've ever met in my entire existence, and some of them are the most amazing and genuine. But you can't seem to get to the amazing and genuine without going through the plastic first. And what I find interesting there is, again, people have become locked into these cults of personality, these pyramid-like structures, placing their sacrifice in their blood, sweat, bone, and energy, well-being, and identity on the altars of these tin pot despots. Something that's quite interesting is a person who does not insist upon themselves, in that, like, I don't really want to put myself in other people's faces to show my value or virtue or how working with me is going to be a good thing for you, you know? I like to let some of the things speak for themselves, but in the world that we live in, we do actually have to put ourselves out there to a degree. Now, the issue with this, with these tin pot despots and the plastic gods of the online business and coaching world, is a lot of them have become wedded to these methods that essentially is a monetized version of their own process, with the mentality of, if I did it, you can do it. If it worked for me, it could work for you. Let me tell you, as a neurodivergent person and a trained educator, this is absolute bullshit, because there is no one way or singular method that is going to work for everyone. And we all have to find our own way within our way of engaging with the world and our way of conceptualizing of the world. And if you're being pushed into the framework and constructs of someone who is very much a card-carrying ambassador of the plastic society and an emissary of the plastic gods, if your foundations are based on heart, soul, and a sense of truth and honesty in this world, you're not going to have a good time. And there have been many moments in my journey, particularly with one business coach and their group in particular, that when trying to find ways to put myself out there that felt authentic and felt aligned and felt like this was me making the right choices for me, I was constantly pushed back into my box, constantly repressed, and constantly had my ideas made to feel like they were stupid or small because they contradicted the method of the person in charge. And of course, in these groups, you have a handful of people that surround the person in charge that are absolute sycophantic idiots, to be very polite. So you have this thing of people positioning themselves that want to see you succeed, that want to see you thrive and want to see you do well, but only if it lines their pocket, doesn't contradict them, and doesn't get in the way or obstruct or undermine the seat of their own power. Like we say, this is a micro version of the macro and a very big fingerprint of the plastic society. Because in our world at large, there are so many different perspectives, ideas, ideologies, expressions, and cultures that are going to see the world very differently to one another. But there has to be a space for them to all exist harmoniously. And harmoniously doesn't always mean standing hand in hand, skipping, singing, and everything's lovey-dovey-doo-dah. Sometimes it means giving each other space and recognizing the texture of vibration is different between these different energies, groups, and circles and communities, and however you want to put it. We have, with this culture of individualism, the reason I mention this online business coaching world is, well, I mean, obviously I've got experience of it, but when we look at how people internalize the systems, and when we look at how people have become the embodiment of systems and processes, their pyramids, if you look a little closely, you'll see that their pyramids are a nice, neat pile of skulls of everyone and everything they've ever stepped on and over to get to where they are. Some people believe the world is kill or be killed, is consume or be consumed, but ultimately there is always a bigger fish. There is always going to be a bigger challenge. There is always going to be something that you cannot just out-attitude yourself from. we have to recognize that we are part of a much bigger, evolving construct of interconnected and all permeating consciousness. So when we start to shift our view, and when we start to recognize that, and we start to see a harmony between things, we start to see a consciousness between things. And when we have that shift where, do you know what, I don't want to focus on the plastic anymore. I'm not going to let this define my experience. I'm not going to let this be me, and shift towards the gold, which is the development of self-expression and allowing ourselves to find our own place in the world, things get more interesting. But the hurdle to all of this is how we, again, have been encouraged since however long time, to focus on fitting in, being part of the group. What are the narrow margins of acceptability and the narrow margins of what is desirable and undesirable? We shave off a lot of the expression of self. This is the boot of supremacy, of oppression, and all of these various different things that seek to dominate one over the other. And we can look at this as, systems and structures in our world at large, but we can also look at it in terms of mindset. Anything that is foreign to us and foreign to our true nature, that seeks to put itself on top of ourselves and repress, is not natural. And we have to recognize that the world is going through this moment and is coming through this time in awareness with the connection between people and how we are able to present different stories and ideas and perspectives into the world, that maybe we should focus on what's going on in our own backyards rather than trying to dominate what's going on the other side of the planet that's got nothing to do with us. Even though in a historic sense, we may have made pledges, we may have decided to do things in a certain way, but we need to look at things in a more balanced way now. Does it serve the higher purpose of interconnectivity, or does it uphold the plastic thrones of false power based on the mechanisms and constructs of oppression that ultimately push one group of people up to the top, on top of the pile of skulls of groups of people beneath them? These various different things and this falsehood and this kind of stuff, it happens in such a big spectrum that I would go out there to say our entire society is totally fucking plastic. And I hate that, as someone who loves humanity so much, that believes in humanity, that believes we can make it, that believes in the possibility and potential of the human race and what we are capable of for great good, but our collective powers have been inverted and focused towards destruction and consumption and the domination of one another, rather than construction and producing the fruits of consciousness, tending to the garden of humanity to see what can grow in there and weeding out these old ideas. This is a very frustrating time, but we also have to recognize that when we make that choice to stop embodying these things and values and beliefs in our personal world, we open ourselves up not to just better forms of connection and understanding with one another, but better forms of connection and understanding with ourselves. When we recognize this, we start to move towards a more personal compass of direction and a more personal gauge of morality and a personal idea of what is right and what is wrong, rather than having these things prescribed for us. So many people believe that they think freely, but on social media, I've noticed when someone describes themselves as a free or critical thinker, most of the things they share are regurgitated talking points from the regressive and obstructive ideologies that are the hallmark of the plastic society. There is an irony, but irony requires self-awareness, and self-awareness is in short supply with these kinds of folks. Do we have to be compassionate? I don't know. I can't answer that question, because there is a point where my compassion and empathy ends. And my compassion and empathy ends where the desire to dominate and control and oppress others begins in others. So that's the point. I'm like, do you know what? Like, I'm not interested in this kind of thing. I'm not interested in this kind of idea, because as someone who has like a mixed ethnic heritage, and I consider myself British by birth and raised in the culture. I mean, like, I described myself as a spicy Brit the other night to the taxi driver who was asking me, "Oh, where are you from?" They always ask that because, like, they can't quite place that based on what I look like. It's important to me to recognize that when we have to be forced to integrate and assimilate into cultures that require dominance and subservience, it's not making the wider culture any better. It's, again, repressing anything that can augment the culture, can help the culture evolve. Because one of the beautiful things about Britain, to me and many others, is that multicultural fingerprint, that there are so many different influences and ideas, and this island has become a rich tapestry of things that it brings me great sadness that there is such a regressive movement claiming to want to reform the country. But again, it's the most plastic movement of all, brainwashing people, playing on their fears that society's leaving them behind, that people of different colored skin or gender identity or sexual identity is somehow corrupting, when really all the problems stem back to those who wish to retain their grip on the keys to power and keep the established order of things going. It is total bull, and it is a tragedy at best. And what I find difficult here is that when any one of us has to repress parts of us that are natural to ourselves, repress parts of us that make us different, repress the actual gold inside of us, we are then forced into adopting these plastic beliefs and ideas and ideologies as our own to fit in. And a lot of people do not recognize and realize that they're doing this because this happens through many unconscious and subtle shifts. But when we start to come into awareness of that, and when we start to come into consciousness of that, we see how these various different threads have interwoven themselves throughout our lives. And it is interesting because, some people can find that overwhelming. But for me, once we have that awareness, once we have that awakening, we see how we can start to unpick and untether ourselves and choose a true path to freedom, even if that means there is a lot of work to be done in the internal world. It's the nature of the game, my friends. But we have to look at who are we choosing to anoint as those to have any authority over us? Who do we allow to have influence over us? Who are we listening to? We need to listen to ourselves, but we also need to recognize that there are a great many people who profit and benefit from us falling into line behind their ideas and influence. And in times of struggle, times of hardship, times of uncertainty, humans have always looked to the more extreme and the loud voices to provide answers to themselves. And this reminds me of Brian Eno's oblique strategy cards. Now, for those of you that don't know, Brian Eno is a very well-known musician, music producer, composer. He was very famous for being one of the leading lights in ambient music, and done a lot of different interesting things over the years. And he produced a set of cards that were called oblique strategy cards that were designed to push creativity in a different direction in the studio, whether, the wheels had fallen off, they'd hit an impasse, or just having some different way of looking at things to move forward. One of these strategy cards, which is advice that I have held very dear over the years, many, many years. I think I first heard about this when I was probably about 10 or 11. And one of the strategy cards said, listen to the quiet voice. Now, as someone who is an intuitive practitioner, does psychic work and all these different things, psychic is a dirty word, isn't it? But we'll come to that another day, because again, these things speak to the natural innate gold that some people are imbued with, which of course we all have these connections. But in the plastic society, when you start to see things through a higher influence and you're able to read through the lines and you see that all that glitters is definitely not gold, of course it's going to be demonized. And in these times where we have these flapping gas bags, these reanimated Frankenstein's monsters of the old world with all of the charm of a freshly wanked penis, I think was a quote from Jamila Jamil about a particular loud gas bag that did entertain me because it is so apt. We have to recognize that listening to the quiet voice now is essential. Because if we listen to these gas bags, we're just going to get angry, we're going to get whipped up into a frenzy. because they're freaking out because they believe that their world is dying. When we're not locked into that cycle of self-oppressing bullshit, we actually see that the world is changing, the world is evolving, the world has to evolve. It cannot continue to survive as it is, let alone thrive. So we need to see that things are changing. For things to evolve in a harmonious way, we have to recognize that we all bring different things to the table. Recognizing what we bring to the table and the essence of that, the texture of that, is the gold of the human spirit, is the gold of the self. And again, not all of this is going to have an immediate monetary value. When people come to me in session and they're feeling a bit blocked, or they're feeling stressed, or they feel like they need something, they need the needle to move in life a little bit, it's always shown to me the same thing. They need some kind of positive, creative, constructive channel of human expression. And the funny thing is, when I advise this, sometimes they're resistant because they think that, oh, who's going to want to look at my art? Who's going to want to listen to my music? Who's going to want to buy that? Who's going to want to consume that? Whereas the function of the art always is for the art to exist, because it is the medium that is given to the expression. And when you put the expression outside of yourself, when it exists outside of your own energy, it frees up your personal bandwidth. It frees up the mental RAM. It gives you more space and capacity to do other things, to see a bit more broadly, but also to step outside of one of the fundamental systems that keeps the plastic society upheld and thriving, which is emotional manipulation and dysregulation. Because when you have that release valve of creativity and that personal self-expression, it allows you to not get pulled into the game. It allows you to not get sucked into the nonsense, and allows you to not get pulled into that deep water with all of this supposed crazy stuff. Whereas if you zoom out, you'll just see it's someone trying to hold your face in a puddle and making you freak out. It's about creating a sense of buffer. It's giving you that aspect to express yourself. Because supposedly, if self-expression cannot be monetized, it is therefore not of value. Whereas if the gold of your spirit, the gold of your perspective, and the gold of your awareness and wisdom is about having an individualized form of self-expression, giving a voice to something that is within you, and allowing you to really kind of pick up and take things that offer an insight and perspective into yourself, even if no one ever sees it, still go and do it, because it still has value. It just might not have value in the plastic society because it can't be turned into a commodity. Another aspect and issue with plastic society is everything is commoditized. Everything is a product. Everyone is a product. Everyone is having to fit themselves in to a hierarchy of monetized value. This is unnatural. It is against our very nature. It is against the natural order of things. It's total bullshit. We need to recognize that to thrive in the future, we have to have a harmonious relationship with our environment, with each other, with nature and the world around us. Otherwise, the planet is going to shake us off as a dog will shake off fleas, and it will go through its process. Then many thousands of years in the future, it will be absolutely fine. If you do not give yourself an opportunity to pull out, to zoom out of the plasticity and the nonsense that this society tries to make us all embody, you will have no choice than to be another drone of this society, to be another ant in all of this. And this is one of the things that I find interesting, because there's so many people out there that, we listen to, they have their influence, they're the self-development gurus and all this kind of shit, and nothing qualifies them to be in that position. They're just there because they're loud. And one of the things that I struggled with, like we discussed in the last episode, was, well, why me? Why do I keep getting maneuvered into this position? It's like, well, why not you? What makes you different to anyone else that is in that position, that has chosen to shine the light for others? We need more variety. We need more diversity. We need a broader landscape of expression. And contributing to that broader landscape of expression and inspiration and guiding others is something that we can all be a part of. Because, like I said, with the creativity, if that is about your self-expression, that allows you to then enter into other situations with a more open mind. When we start to see that, supposedly like this movement that's claiming to rebel against the system is actually just the system on crack, we recognize that these are not the choices to make for our collective future. People who are very much steeped in the ways of the past have no interest and no business telling us what is good for us, because their only interest in business is of advancing their own cause, lining their own pockets, and the interests of self. And when we start to recognize this, we can come to a more expanded realm of consciousness. A lot of a movement that calls itself awakened is not awakened at all. Again, like I mentioned earlier, people parroting these talking points of regressive ideologies while calling themselves a free thinker or a truth seeker. These are some of the fingerprints where we can recognize that people are just still sipping on that Kool-Aid of the old world and the plastic society. If we are going to awaken to something larger than ourselves, we have to recognize that we're all connected, that sometimes that we might need to recognize that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, especially if we're going to move this whole thing forward. But people don't like to do that. They don't like to have that conversation. And this is where, as a spiritual practitioner, I have come into conflict with a lot of spiritual practitioners when I first started out, because to me, their ideas of awakening, of being the sovereign being and all this other crap was just individualism amplified on steroids and given a sparkly woo-woo sheen. There is no mention about how humans are ultimately a product of their environment and how their environment influences their lives, and how within those environments they can either thrive or fail if they choose to work in harmony with their environment or try and push against it, because at some point, invariably, the environment will push back on you. The structure will push back on you. And trying to think that you can out-mindset the world is crazy talk, very plastic idea. And of course, the whole business model of these folks is when you hit that wall, you come back and pay for the next course, the next mastermind, which of course is more expensive than the last. But it keeps these people in their own plastic pyramid and in business because it's profitable in the plastic society to have that model of business where awakening is sold for a price, but awakening is always kept just out of reach, or it's delivered in a way of hierarchical constructs. I was talking with another friend yesterday about how we view humor and lightheartedness as a sign of intelligence, and you can't be deep if you can't be light. And the plastic society will have you believing that it's one or the other. It's all about binaries. It's all about hierarchy. It's all about having that black and white view of the world. Whereas really, when we start to see things as textural, as nuanced, again, that is where we can start to access the gold of the human spirit. Again, that is how we can allow that gold of ourselves to shine through. And again, this is where so many people are falling down when they claim themselves to be awakened, to be free thinkers, to be free of the matrix and all this kind of stuff. But then you look at what they're saying, and they're saying the same things as so many other people over and over again, claiming it as gospel, but there is no proof other than someone loud on the internet told them, because someone loud on the internet played with the fact that they have no emotional structure or no personal channel of expression, or they've got, unintegrated pain that has become the basis of their worldview and the basis of their spiritual awakening, which is very, very true for so many people that call themselves awakened after the year 2020. But I think that is a subject for another day, or a subject for maybe a series of 500 podcasts that I could talk about at great length. Because, anything that is about the gold of the human spirit, anything that is about true awakening, frees us from construct and structure. It frees us from outside influence. It frees us from definitions of value that emanate from anywhere than inside the self. Because when we recognize that everyone is different, we recognize that everyone has something different to offer, we recognize that the tapestry that humanity creates can really thrive if everyone is in their own energy, if everyone is doing their own thing, and if everyone has that sense of connection with themselves, then we get to something really interesting, and we get to something that is really powerful. And then we can see how people are either there to be in service of the future or want us to be in service of them because they benefit from having power and control over us. It's so funny when people claim to be awakened and see through the crap, but then will advocate for very regressive politics once again, because they're denying the gold of their own spirit because it's safer to stand behind the loud voice because they're scared of the unknown. Spirituality and spiritual awareness and spiritual connection is supposed to help you meet the unknown with a sense of openness and a sense of peace. If you are not able to do that, how are you going to enter into the self-inquiry that allows you to connect with the gold of the human spirit? Because we are not encouraged to connect with the gold of our spirit. We're encouraged to try and fit in. We're encouraged to try and do these various different things that make us the good person by these value metrics that are imposed upon us, these agendas and ideologies. And that's why in unknown times, we have to look outside the circle for solutions. We have to look more to community and connection as to how we can actually create a sense of progress and motion and things moving forward for us. So when people claim to be awakened, but then will throw in their lot behind certain ideologies and agendas with politics and control and oppression of one group over another, they are not meeting the unknown with openness. They are meeting the unknown with fear and going to the familiar. Even if the familiar is collapsing, they will choose to go down with the ship because they were right. Is it though? Are they right? Or it's just self-righteous bullshit? And this is why I like to think of things as progressive or regressive or obstructive or constructive, because if we're going to free ourselves from these constructs, it's no good pitching yourself at one side or another or saying, this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing. We have to look at the values. We have to look at, does this purely support yourself, or is it about uplifting the collective, elevating the collective? Anything in its extreme is negative because it takes a black and white view. It tries to solve every problem with a hammer, so every problem looks like a nail when you need the whole toolbox for a variety of different things. I don't claim to have all the answers, far from it. I'm just a guy sharing perspective and ideas on various different topics because I'm curious about the world. I'm not necessarily here to put myself above anyone. I'm not asking anyone to follow me as any kind of leader. I wish for people to follow themselves. I wish for people to recognize that everyone is supposed to be different. Everyone is supposed to express themselves differently. It frustrates me when people will try and view systemic failing as personal failing. And we look at all of these trends and these ideas of supposedly any kind of fault with you as your own problem to fix, rather than in some cases society hasn't given you the right support structures, or with certain healthcare issues or neurodiversity issues, you don't fit into that nice, neat definition of normalcy. So therefore, there's a problem with you. There's something wrong with you, rather than being given the right means of structure to support yourself, to thrive and to help you move forward and play to your strengths. There are so many things that I find contemptible that people are using to justify the plastic society and championing it as progress. Handy way to spot these regressive ideas in action is that every accusation is a confession. It's frustrating because when we look at this from a distance, for me, my friends, the people I'm connected with, they will contain multitudes, and a lot of these folks who are trying to position themselves as being of influence, being in power of control, don't even have a single tude to rub between them. It's just not there. There's nothing. There's no diversity of their own minds. There's no vision. There's no passion. There's no imagination. I find it difficult to take anyone seriously who takes everything seriously. There was a video uploaded to one of the social media platforms recently of two comedians talking, and one of them was invited on a chat show, and the leader of a particularly regressive political movement was sharing a dressing room with them. And that person said, "I don't find comedy funny." And you think, wow, what a quote. I don't find comedy funny. Imagine not being able to laugh. Imagine not being able to find joy in the world or share in laughter with others. That is some of the most plastic-minded, regressive stuff I've ever heard in my life. Because one of the things about the hollow leadership of the plastic society and those who wish to install themselves above us in that position of power and control is their inability to find anything funny, especially when it comes to themselves. Because real power, truth, anything that is of integrity, it can stand to have a few pot shots taken at it because it's like, yeah, all right, come on, you know. Good humor, satirical humor, all of this kind of stuff, it always punches up at structures and mechanisms. And people who are in the leadership positions of that, they are the symbols of the structure and the mechanism. But when the power is false, when the power is unearned, when the power is rooted in oppression, they cannot handle being laughed at. They cannot handle a joke being made of them. They cannot handle being turned into a meme or anything like that. And oftentimes you'll hear these people harp on about free speech and freedom of expression being taken away from them. But then if someone says something they don't like or disagrees with them, they will take away their ability to express themselves if they're given half the chance. So we can see that one of the great fingerprints of the plastic society is hypocrisy, fragility, brittleness, rigidness, the inability to meet the unknown with any kind of openness, the inability to step into a more formless flow of things, something more organic, because in nature, structures do not form in straight lines. They're a little wavy, a little wiggly. It is the man-made world where everything is very much in a grid. So we have to recognize, again, to get with nature, to get a little wiggly, as Alan Watts once said, rather than forcing ourselves into these very rigid constructs of who and what we're supposed to be, what is normal, what is not normal. Nothing is normal, my friends. Let's get weird, let's get freaky, let's raise the freak flag. So we can allow ourselves to come into ourselves in a way that allows us to be ourselves. One of my mantras that I was so fond of saying people at parties when I would see them dancing very rigidly, because I love a party. You know, I describe my energy as a disco ball comet blazing through the sky, and I will not deny my true nature. And I would go up to people like this at parties, and I would march them over to the speaker stack. And just bear with me a minute, and be like, right, you got to release yourself from yourself to be yourself. And they're like, what the fuck are you on about, man? I'm like, look, you're here at the party. The music is bumping. You're dancing like a reanimated corpse, twitching like an absolute twat with no rhythm. Are you with me, or are you up your own arse? And there'd be a bit like, there was a moment where they're like, I don't know whether to punch this man or hug this man. Luckily, it's always been the hugging. But there is that sense that for this journey, you have to let go of yourself. You have to let go of these ideas that were placed upon you of what you are supposed to be, of what makes you of value, what makes you a good person, what makes you a desirable person, what makes you a person of worth. Let it all go. Allow yourself to connect with your own meaning, with your own structures, because meaning has to come from the inside. One of the crises that we face in our society at the moment is a disconnection from meaning. And meaning needs to transcend our immediate circumstances. It needs to transcend that transactional nature of the plastic society where everything comes at a price, but no one knows the value. And when we start to have these shifts, we start to have the shifts in recognition, we can recognize that we all have got something to put on the table. It doesn't need to be monetized, doesn't need to be turned into a business. Again, this is one of my criticisms of so many in the spiritual community, is they choose to monetize their own personal path rather than recognizing that maybe their awakening was an experience just for them. But again, these are the ones who, when you have a critique of structures and systems, they've personified it, so they take it as a criticism and an attack of themselves and react accordingly. We can see that they are embodying the plastic society. They have denied themselves the connection with the gold of their own spirit, because instead of allowing themselves to become curious and open and inquisitive, they've sought to become authoritative as they've strapped the flag of their ego to the mask of professionalism of being a spiritual practitioner. There are so many, this doesn't have to be in the industry of spirituality. Like I say, the industry, pumping out them practitioners like a sausage factory, just like when I was at music college, of the musician by numbers, ABC, color in between the lines, spiritual practitioner by numbers, ABC, color in between the lines. There's no innovation, no imagination, no curiosity, no passion. All of these things are very human qualities and properties. So we need to recognize that as our structures are thrown into question, as our values need to evolve, as our world has suddenly gotten very small and we don't know how to deal with it because it contradicts the narratives that we have built our nations upon, we have to look within. Our answers will not come from inside those structures that have been fed by these ideas. They will come from outside of those structures. They will come from the people. They will come from community. We need to look beyond the lines of division, of classification, of the little groups and things and stuff and cults and whatever that we've chosen to affiliate ourselves with. We look to the human connection. We look to the passion. We look to the things that set us on fire. We look to the things that light us up. We look to the things that bring that sense of inspiration to us. And that is where we will find the threads of the gold of the human spirit. And you can have anything you want in this life. You can aspire to anything that you want in this life. You can be anyone that you want to be, and that is fine. But all I say is, do that built on the foundation of heart. Do that built on the foundation of soul. Do that built on openness and curiosity and allowing yourself to really connect with something bigger than yourself and not defined by others and not shaped by the values of a society that is plastic, that as the world is getting hotter will melt in the heat, in which that same heat will be the heat that purifies the gold of the human spirit. All you need to do is to recognize that you get to choose where and what you place value on and what is meaningful to you, and allowing yourself to step into those processes. Don't listen to the gas bags. Don't listen to the people who have vested interest in your subservience to them. Listen to yourself. Choose your own definitions. Choose your own metrics. Choose your own path. Allow this to become your North Star. Use it as your compass. Use it as your way of connecting with the world, of expressing yourself in the world, of being in harmony with others, recognizing that everyone has got space to vibe. It's just important that when your vibe is not maintained by positioning itself above others, because again, that is a symbol of the plastic society, of the more integrative society built on the gold of the human spirit. There is space for everyone. There's room for everyone. There is going to be natural points of connection, natural points of disconnection. But that also means we have to recognize that not everyone is coming at things from the same place. And when we start to look at that, we can naturally heal the access points where the more extreme ideas come into manifestation and come through. We can naturally start to close those wounds. We can naturally start to cut off the oxygen supply at the source for these things, because we don't need to fall rank and file behind them, because we recognize like there is space for everyone on the earth. There is space for every idea. Again, not the extreme stuff, because the extreme stuff requires everything else to be pushed under and behind it. When we're working from that place of connectivity and that place of openness, the extreme ideas and viewpoints and thinkings naturally will not be able to get a foothold. And this is what's important when I say, do we choose plastic? Do we choose gold? Because with the work of personal alchemy and the work of personal progress, it's always been about turning the lead of the unawakened human into the gold with the realized human spirit. And again, this is where a lot of the stuff in alchemy in the historical times was misinterpreted. It's like, yes, we're going to literally turn lead into gold. And it's like, well, actually, it's like the lead of the unawakened human, the gold of the human spirit, doofus. What are you going to do? But, you know, we're always on that journey, and we're always engaging with it in different ways, and we're always finding different points of access to that. And we have to recognize that so many things on this world are labeled bad or some variation of bad because they are a threat to false power, which is a plastic structure. They present a heat source that will melt the structure. And when we are moving from that position of gold, from that position of truth and self-defined identity, it gives us a broader perspective on this kind of thing. And we see that people clinging to these plastic structures and upholding them and sitting on top of those empires of dirt are living in a very small world. And I say this, my friends, Do you want to live in a small world, or do you want to live in a big world? Because the more that you follow the thread of the human spirit and allow yourself to realize the gold within and the self-expression and value that that can carry and put on the table in the world, the more that your world is going to expand. The more that you will see that there is magic in every day, the more that you will see the connection between things, the more that you'll recognize that there is a lot more beauty than there is horror in this world. And right now we've got a lot of things that we need to sort out as a society, and there are a lot of horrors, and there are a lot of challenges, there's a lot of hardships, there's a lot of unnecessary death and destruction. And we cannot heal that if we don't choose to walk that path that follows the thread of curiosity that leads us to the realization of the gold of the human spirit that exists outside of these definitions, outside of these structures, outside of these narrow margins, and all of these different things. All you got to do is be curious and be open. And to be curious and to be open, you can't be scared, which is why I say spirituality, when functioning authentically, lets you meet the unknown with an openness and a curiosity. So anything that's claiming to be awakened while built upon a structure of fear is not awakened. Anything that is claiming to build the future upon a vision of the past is not progressive or constructive. We have to find our own ways, and we have to find our own connections, and we have to allow ourselves to let our definitions change, evolve, and grow, because it's the mark of an evolved human being who can change their mind, who can open their mind, who, when presented with different ideas and perspectives, can go, oh, you know what? I never thought about it like that before, or I never thought about how my view affects you, or how it translates to this group of people, and how maybe we both might be in the wrong. You know, there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of growth that can happen in these difficult times. And in challenging times, these are the biggest times that we can create the opportunities to make change. And these are the times where we can actually recognize that there is more that can be accomplished if we do that work on ourselves and come into these things from a position of expanded awareness. So once again, I ask you, do you choose plastic or do you choose gold on this journey and in this world and in this life? Because it might seem like a simple question, but there are so many things to become untethered from. If we really do truly choose the path of gold rather than the path of plastic, because sometimes it can take a little bit longer to get to where you want to go because you're taking the stairs instead of the lift or the elevator, depending on where you're listening to this from. So once again, thank you for joining me for an episode of The Big Soup. Many threads of ideas I'm sure we will revisit again, because the theme of plastic and gold is something that is quite important to me and close to my heart. So if you want to work with me, or you'd like me to support you on your journey in any way, shape or form that is within my remit of skills and talents and abilities and experience, please feel free to visit my website, alistairballantyne.com. The link is in the show notes, where I'm here to support spiritually aware and sensitive people with a future-focused nature. Once again, I thank you for listening. I hope you're doing well. And like I say, choose gold, my friends. And I say choose gold wherever you can, and let that become manifest for you through whatever means you see fit, as long as they don't exploit or oppress or harm anything, anyone, anywhere. Much love and peace out for now.